The first winter breeze swept through the glass corridors of the CyberCore office building, tossing up dust-covered fires. In the air, the hurried scent of coffee mixed with fresh paint lingered. A woman in a silver gray coat with a tiny name tag loosely clipped to her chest quietly entered through the side door. No one noticed her. She blended into the space as if she had always been there. Her face was partially hidden under a low-brimmed cap, and the fluorescent ceiling lights only made the fine wrinkles around her eyes more visible. Signs of someone who had seen more than she ever told. Her name was Ella Thompson. On paper, she was a temporary janitor, recently hired through a labor supply company. But in truth, she was the adopted daughter of Richard Thompson, the founder and chairman of CyberCore. A strict man, he lived by principles and believed in facts more than promises. It was he who had taken Ella in when she was just 14, after her parents died tragically in a technical accident while working at a factory owned by the company. Ella grew up in a disciplined home, received a proper education, and later served in the military as a cybersecurity specialist. She could have easily advanced straight into the position of tech director after her discharge. But Richard had a different offer, not an assignment, but a challenge. He said, "If you want to understand the company, don't sit in a meeting room. Go to the places no one wants to look, the basement, the bathrooms, and into the eyes of those forgotten." Ella understood, and she nodded. The first week passed in silence. She cleaned workspaces, restrooms, even the server room on B2, an area seldom visited except by night shift technicians. No one remembered her name. No one met her gaze for more than 3 seconds. People handed her instructions as if she were an old program coded to obey. She didn't blame them. She, too, had once lived within those quiet assumptions, until she saw firsthand the cracks in the system's operations, caused not by malware, but by human indifference. One Monday morning, Ella was cleaning hallway windows when Jacob, the head of operations, passed by with 2 employees. He called out unreservedly, "Make sure this glass is spotless. Don't let the boss see fingerprints and think we're sloppy." One person scoffed, the other looked at Ella with a mixture of pity and disdain. Ella said nothing, just nodded and continued wiping. But inside, she memorized every word. That same afternoon in the staff lounge, Jacob lounged on the sofa, legs propped up on the table, holding a half-empty iced coffee. He looked at Ella collecting the trash and casually said, "You're new, right? I like how quiet you are. But if you don't clean properly, don't expect to stick around." Ella paused for a second. That wasn't a reminder, it was a warning, a type of silent power nurtured through years of unchecked behavior. Daniel Reyes, the lead systems engineer, happened to walk by. He stopped, looked at Jacob, then at Ella. His gaze hesitated, then he gave a slight nod, like a silent greeting. Ella realized that among all the indifferent stares, his was the only one that felt genuine. As night fell, Ella returned to the small apartment she rented near the company. She opened her old laptop and connected a covert recording device she had just tested in the lounge. Jacob's voice played back clearly, every word intact. She stored, encrypted, and hid the file in a secure data zone under a harmless name. Week 1 cleaning schedule. She didn't know when she'd need it, but she knew that the smallest details often held the largest truths. On the third day, Ella arrived earlier than usual. She stood outside the meeting room watching people enter. White shirts, neatly knotted ties, and artificial smiles. They walked past her. No one stopped. No one offered her a drink or asked a polite question. They walked as if engaged in some noble battle. But Ella knew the real battles didn't happen in meeting rooms. They happened in the eyes of a guard being scolded for a false alarm, in the size of a technician asked to work overtime without acknowledgement, in the hollow nod of a colleague who looked at someone like her. That afternoon, as she passed the tech room, she caught part of a conversation. "I heard someone just had their pay cut for reporting an incident." "Where there's smoke, there's fire," another sneered. Ella paused, took a mental note of the time and location, and marked it on the internal map. She was building a map of power and silence. A week passed. People had grown used to her presence as if she were office furniture, always there, not needing thanks. But Ella didn't come to be seen. She came to see, truly. And in that silence when she began redrawing the essence of a company not with organizational charts, but through the ethical fragments scattered along these cold corridors. A tech company might build the most robust firewall, but if the hearts inside are hollow, no hacker is needed. The system will collapse from within. Ella knew the day of reckoning would come, but before that she had to remain the unnoticed shadow, because it was in that very darkness that the truth could be seen most clearly. The following days passed like a steady loop of dust and silence. Ella maintained her role as the invisible cog in the system. She still mopped the floors, emptied trash, washed coffee cups, checked the restrooms, all in all the tasks no one cared about, yet everyone needed done. But behind each quiet step was a pair of watchful eyes, ears tuned to conversations. People assumed no one would ever hear, and hands silently recording the underground fractures cracking the company's core. That Wednesday, around 8 p.m., when the office was nearly deserted, she stepped into the third-floor tech room. The dim glow of a blue monitor reflected off the face of a young engineer who had fallen asleep at the desk. The screen was still compiling a line of code. Ella stepped closer, scanned carefully, and immediately noticed something off. An authentication lock script had been altered, with no traceable verification. Of a piece of code capable of bypassing internal security protocols. She frowned slightly, eyes fixed on the string of commands. She pulled out her phone, not to take a picture, but to attach a fingertip-sized device beneath the keyboard. It would track every command typed for the next 48 hours. No one would know. The next morning, she arrived early again. While cleaning the glass panels on the 5th floor, a familiar voice rang out. Still that smug tone, syrupy sweet, like sugar laced with poison. Make it cleaner. I want to see my reflection in this, not the dust, Jacob said as he checked his reflection on his phone. Ella turned, nodded. I'm working on it, sir. Jacob smirked. Good. Last time a ministry guest came by, the door had fingerprints. If the boss finds out, I won't be the one getting yelled at. Ella bent lower, scrubbing harder, not because the glass was dirty, but because she needed to hide her face hardening with cold restraint. Later that noon in the pantry, the rare spot where a few people paused for coffee or a quick meal, Ella overheard a conversation between two mid-level tech staff. One sounded worried. I checked. That script from last week was clearly overwritten by someone, but no one believes me. Jacob even pulled me into his office and warned me that if I kept poking around aimlessly, I should reconsider my long-term contract. The other replied in a low voice, he's got backing. Don't be foolish. Not everyone here plays by the rules. Ella stood a few meters away, wiping a table, her ears sharp to every word. She logged the moment mentally the second she stepped out. Day 9, second-level authentication code tampered. Tech engineer raised concern and was warned. That afternoon, she was assigned to clean the basement archive, a space rarely visited. On her way down, she ran into Daniel. He was checking the electrical board for the new camera setup. Upon seeing her, he smiled. Holding up all right? Ella nodded. Not too bad. Daniel paused a few seconds, then lowered his voice. I saw you the other day in the server room. No one goes down there unless they have a reason. You used to work in IT? Ella paused half a beat. Worked in an installation workshop. Old habits. Daniel smiled faintly, asked nothing more, but the look in his eyes showed he had noticed something. Not clear, but enough to raise flags. That night, Ella returned to her apartment. She connected the device from the tech room to her laptop. On screen, the log of Jacob's command inputs appeared. He had used admin privileges to alter the authentication code. More than that, he had copied a file from the system onto a USB drive, a file labeled Beta Gov Access. Ella exhaled slowly. This was no longer just an internal matter. This was a serious breach of security, potentially tied to a government collaboration project. The next morning, she carried her tool bag down to B1. She headed for the secondary data room, where Jacob often lingered after hours. She placed a mini recording device behind the air conditioner. It didn't film, but it captured voice and sound signatures, enough to verify threats or illicit discussions. As she stepped out, she ran into Jacob. He looked surprised but quickly regained his superiority. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Scheduled cleaning," Ella replied calmly. Jacob stared at her, then smiled like someone who had just thought of a clever joke. "What's your name again?" Ella feigned confusion. "Emily, sir." "Emily," he repeated slowly. "You seem like a hard worker. I like people who don't talk much. Who knows their place? Hope you keep your mouth shut as well as you handle a mop." Ella bowed her head. "Yes, I know my place." After Jacob walked away, she remained alone in the cold hallway. His final words didn't anger her. They made her sad. Sad that people like him could climb so high and no one dared ask why. Sad that in a tech company specializing in security solutions, the biggest breach was not in the system, but in human integrity. And at that moment, Ella knew the investigation had entered a new phase. It was no longer about exposing one man, but an entire mechanism where power thrived behind silence, or where code was no longer neutral, and where the people who truly held the company together were the fading shadows no one remembered. She opened the mental notebook in her mind and wondered, what form will justice take? A line of code? A report? Or a janitor brave enough to say no? Monday, 5:45 p.m. The hallway on the third floor was deserted. Only the distant click of a female manager's high heels and the faint hiss of the automatic coffee machine echoed through the silence. Ella had just finished cleaning the restroom at the end of the corridor and was pushing her utility cart out when she heard the tech room door swing open behind her. "Emily, wait a minute," Jacob's voice called out from the far end. He walked briskly toward her, his heavy leather shoes striking the floor with a rhythm that felt more like a signal than a sound. Ella stopped, kept a calm expression, both hands resting on the cart's handle. "Is there something you need, Mr. Jacob?" He stopped in front of her, eyes scanning her like they could pick up every micro movement. "You've been working here for almost 2 weeks now, right?" "Yes, I'm getting used to it." "You're quiet, hardworking. I like that." Jacob squinted slightly. "But you also seem curious." Ella tilted her head slightly. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean." He stepped closer, close enough that Ella could catch the faint scent of mint mixed with tobacco on his breath. He placed a hand on the edge of her cart, leaning in. "I've seen you wandering around, tech room, server room. You think I haven't noticed?" "That's the area I was assigned to clean," she replied, voice steady though deliberate. He chuckled. Every reason sounds reasonable when spoken with a calm voice. His hand left the cart, but not before it grazed the back of hers, whether by accident or design. Ella took a half step back, not too obvious, but just enough for him to sense the boundary. Jacob kept smiling, this time a half smile. "You know, if you wanted, I could help you get out of this filthy job." "What do you mean?" He adjusted his collar like he was preparing for a keynote speech, then lowered his voice. "I have influence. I could get you promoted to a tech assistant. Higher pay, easier hours, no more dragging a mop around. But," he paused, "everything comes with conditions." Ella clenched her fingers slightly. Half of her, the soldier who had seen combat, the engineer who had cracked military malware, screamed for a confrontation. But the other half, disciplined and focused on the mission, swallowed it into silence. "Thank you," she said, "but I'm content with my current job." Jacob raised his brows. "You do know I'm not someone who takes rejection lightly, right?" Ella looked straight into his eyes. "I just do the job I was assigned. If you think I've done something wrong, feel free to report it to management." Jacob laughed, not at all fazed. "Management? You really think anyone's going to listen to a janitor? Around here, it's my word that counts. You should remember that." Ella didn't reply. She gave a slight nod and turned the cart to leave. But suddenly, Jacob grabbed her wrist, this time a real contact. His fingers gripped her firmly, not enough to leave a bruise, but just enough to deliver one message: control. Ella looked down at his hand. Her voice dropped, colder, sharper. "Let go." Jacob kept smiling, as if still toying. "Relax, I'm just trying to help." "Help me?" She pulled her hand away. "Or help satisfy your own ego." A flash of anger flickered in Jacob's eyes. You should watch yourself. No one here is going to stand up for you. Ella stood still for a breath, then answered, every word crisp. People only lose faith when they believe no one is watching. But silent eyes don't always mean silent hearts. Jacob sneered. Sounds like something out of an old ethics book. But this world doesn't run on kindness. Maybe not, she replied. But when kindness disappears completely, that's when people start to fall. He looked like he was about to reply, but just then the server room door opened. Daniel stepped out. He froze at the sight. Ella and Jacob standing uncomfortably close, tension hanging like a wire. His gaze shifted to Ella's wrist, where a faint red mark remained. Daniel's brow furrowed. Is everything okay? Jacob immediately put on a calm smile. Nothing, just chatting with the new staff. Ella said nothing. She simply looked at Daniel and gave a small nod. Daniel looked at her, then at Jacob. Then he spoke slowly. I think she should go back to the break room. It's a bit stuffy out here. Jacob chuckled. Well, looks like everyone's getting a little sensitive today. Ella walked away, never turning around. But when she reached the hallway corner, she stopped. She leaned against the wall, closed her eyes for a brief moment. Not out of fear, but because she knew from that moment on, Jacob had crossed the line. And once that line was broken, justice was no longer a choice. It was a mission. That night, she transferred the recording from the B1 device to her computer. The audio was crystal clear. Every advance, every veiled threat, every indication of a man who believed he was untouchable. She saved the file in a special folder, named it J Redline MP3. No explanation needed. She knew. The time had come. This was no longer just an investigation. This was a confrontation. And she, the invisible woman in the silent corridor, would be the one to switch on the first light. Friday, the final day of the monthly reporting cycle. The CyberCore building gleamed from early morning. Meeting rooms were meticulously cleaned, and a red carpet had been rolled out in the main lobby, a space reserved only for the most significant events like contract signings or nationwide executive meetings. The atmosphere was taut like a drawn bowstring. Everyone dressed more sharply, moved more quickly, spoke less. No one dared ask why. Jacob was different. That morning he arrived in a sleek black suit, a red tie, his hair perfectly styled, and his eyes brimming with the gleam of someone who had glimpsed the summit of power. He smiled as he shook hands, whispering into the ears of managers, I have a feeling today will be a big day. Upstairs, the main conference room had been fitted with a giant LED screen, microphones tested 3 times, and the audio system finely tuned. The tech staff had been ordered to disconnect all internal surveillance cameras. From Jacob himself. No need to record a simple meeting, Asha, he said with a casual tone. At 9:30 a.m., people began settling into their seats. Jacob sat in the front row, right beside the seat typically reserved for senior executives. He adjusted his tie for the 3rd time, eyes fixed on the door. Then, exactly at 10 o'clock a.m., the doors opened. Richard Thompson, the founder and chairman of CyberCore, entered. He wore a gray suit, no tie, and held a simple folder in his hand. Beside him stood a woman that most people didn't immediately recognize. But a few faces changed color in an instant. Daniel was one of them. Ella, no longer in janitor uniform. No cart. She wore a black blouse, dark trousers, her hair neatly tied back, her eyes clear and unwavering. Pinned to her lapel, a badge reading, Security Engineer, CyberCore Internal Ethics. For several seconds, no one spoke. Jacob raised an eyebrow, then chuckled. Chairman Thompson, I didn't expect today to be a new hire introduction. Richard didn't reply. He stepped up to the podium, placed the folder on the table, and spoke, his voice deep and sharp. Today, I didn't call this meeting to talk about finances, nor to unveil a new technology. I'm here to talk about core values, something I once believed didn't need to be repeated in a tech company. Jacob laughed again, this time more awkwardly. I understand, sir. Corporate culture is crucial. I always emphasize that to the staff. Richard stared directly at him. Culture is not something to emphasize. It's something to live. Silence filled the room. Jacob shifted slightly, trying to sound composed. Yes, of course. I've always wanted to help build that culture, but forgive me, why is she here? He tilted his head toward Ella. This is an important meeting. We shouldn't allow temp staff to interfere. Richard paused for a moment, then spoke. Ella Thompson, security engineer, military veteran, the person who has carried out an internal investigation for the past 3 weeks under the guise of a maintenance worker. The room tightened. Jacob's eyes widened. Then he jumped up. Wait, is this a joke? Ella stepped beside Richard. From her jacket, she pulled out a storage device and plugged it into the projector. The giant screen lit up. The first line appeared. Internal report, Cybercore, the corruption of power and silence. Then came the audio clips. You should know your place. No one here stands with you. I could help you get out of this filthy job. If you agree, I have influence. No one would believe a janitor. Then footage, taken from a hidden camera. Jacob plugging a USB into the company's system, accessing government-level authentication codes, and transferring files to an external device. His face was clear, undeniable. The room erupted into hushed murmurs. Some held their breath. Others pushed back their chairs. Daniel sat frozen, hands clenched together. Jacob shot up. This is entrapment. She spied on me. This is a violation of my privacy. Richard's voice came cold. She was authorized directly by me, tasked with monitoring internal ethics and cybersecurity. All evidence has been reviewed by legal counsel. Jacob's face turned pale. He lunged forward, a voice cracking. You can't believe a janitor over someone who served this company for 10 years. Ella raised her head. It's because you thought I was just a janitor that you showed who you really are. Richard nodded. And it's because you forgot the value of a human being that you now face the consequences. A team entered, internal security personnel alongside 2 plainclothes investigators. One stepped forward. Jacob Grayson, we are authorized to detain you for unauthorized access to classified data in breach of national security agreements. Jacob struggled. No, I've been set up. You're being fooled. Daniel stood, walking up to him. No one set you up. You did this to yourself. Jacob looked around the room. Not a single person stood up for him. The same faces who once laughed at his jokes, raised glasses at year-end parties, now turned away as if avoiding a man both unraveling and contagious. The door shut behind him. Silence fell again. Richard turned back to the room. His voice was steady. I did not look forward to today's events, but I also could not turn away. A company may be built on technology, but without character, it is nothing more than a cold, soulless machine. He turned to Ella. She wasn't chosen to be my successor because she's my adopted daughter, but because she chose to live truthfully among deceit. Then he looked toward Daniel. And some of you, though silent, have held on to your integrity. You are the real future of Cybercore. Ella stepped forward. Her voice was firm, but not unkind. I'm not stepping into the chairman's seat today. I'm stepping into the role of someone beginning again. We will rebuild, not just systems, but trust. Below, some bowed their heads. Some had tears in their eyes. Daniel nodded quietly. A soft breeze from the ventilation system drifted through, carrying with it a strange, weightless sense of relief. Perhaps what had truly been cleaned today wasn't the floors, it was conscience. When the conference room door closed, it was as if the entire atmosphere within Cybercore shifted. The usual artificial laughter and empty chatter were replaced by a silence born from inner reflection. Employees began looking at each other a moment longer as they passed in the hallway. Some lowered their eyes when walking past the corridor where Ella had once knelt to scrub spilled coffee. Someone muttered, "That was her?" and then fell quiet in thought. Ella didn't return to a designated office. She remained on the top floor, the former fortress of the executive board. A space once filled with light and gleaming furniture now felt oddly bare. On the desk sat only her personal laptop in a thick folder, her proposal for cultural reform, titled Listening from the Basement. She didn't immediately sit in the chairman's seat. Instead, she called a small meeting with only 7 people. Daniel, 2 technicians who had been suppressed by Jacob, an elderly security guard, a receptionist few people knew by name, and 2 cleaning staff. They were the ones she had observed, remembered, and quietly respected. Ella entered the small meeting room carrying no documents, no presentation slides. She stood before them, hands clasped, her voice plain yet heavy with truth. I didn't come here to take power. I came to ask you all one question. What kind of company do we want this to be? No one answered immediately, but their expressions began to change. One of the cleaning ladies, the same woman who once shared half her lunch with Ella, softly said, I just want when I greet someone, they greet me back. The elderly guard followed slowly. I want when I report an intruder, people believe me, not laugh. Daniel clenched his hands lightly. I want to give system feedback without fearing I'll lose my job. Ella nodded and smiled. We will rewrite our processes, but not on paper, through actions. She opened the folder and handed out sections to each person. Each was given leadership over a specific initiative, reforming tech workflows, internal feedback mechanisms, ethical evaluation, and most importantly, a staff care unit, run by those who had once been forgotten. That day, every employee at CyberCore received a special email from Ella. It wasn't long nor boastful, just one line. Today, everyone has the right to speak, and our job is to listen. The first week after Jacob's arrest, staff were still cautious, but as small changes began to appear, they realized this wasn't a promise. It was real action. The tech room got a new anonymous report button. Restrooms had suggestion boards, names optional. Cleaning staff were invited to quarterly internal meetings, not to speak, but to be seen and to be respected as part of the organization. Daniel was appointed head of system security. On the day he received the decision, he stood at the podium, holding the appointment letter, still unsure if it was real. Ella, he said after the meeting, once only the 2 of them remained. Why me? I just did what I thought was right. Ella placed a hand on his shoulder. Exactly. I need people who do what's right, not for gain, but because it's who they are. He fell silent. I won't let you down. She shook her head. Don't think about me. Think about those who were once silenced. By the second week, anonymous emails began arriving in the ethics system. One revealed that the head of finance had pressured staff into cutting off contract wages. Another claimed someone had been denied promotion for speaking up. Ella didn't handle these alone. She formed an internal review council, where every decision required consensus from 3 sides: management, employee reps, and a non-executive member, elected publicly each quarter. Every council meeting began with a handwritten note taped behind the door, in Ella's handwriting. Power doesn't begin with titles. It begins when you dare to speak and dare to listen. By the second month, CyberCore held its first all-staff internal summit in years. There were no flashy performances, no lengthy speeches, just a short video clip documenting the 3-week journey of a silent janitor. Identity never revealed, shown only from behind, listening, recording, and finally standing up. When the video ended, the screen faded to a single quote. No one is truly small if they're brave enough to face the truth. The crowd rose in applause. Many had tears in their eyes, not for the decayed past, but for the glimpse of a future worth building. Ella stood at the very back, never stepping onto the stage. She simply watched the crowd, one face at a time, as if memorizing each one. Then she stepped into the hallway. On the wall hung the company's first ever full-staff group photo: engineers, accountants, janitors, security guards, interns. Below the photo, embossed in silver, CyberCore, a place where every voice carries weight. A young employee stood next to Ella, looked at the photo, then turned to her. Did you really work as a janitor here? Ella smiled. I still do. I clean what people forget the most: indifference. The young man lowered his head, unsure of what to say. But his eyes, like Daniel's that day, said everything. As Ella stepped into the elevator and the doors closed behind her, one thought flickered across her mind. Justice is not a weapon. It is light. And sometimes to switch it on, you have to become the shadow.